Hi, I'm Pam Fox at pamfox.org, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking all about hiatal hernias. So we're back actually in chapter 2 of my book, Plantar Reflux, talking a little bit, first of all, about intragastric pressure. So we talked about that in chapter 2 because these are some of the things we talked about: bloating and constipation that can put pressure on your lower esophageal sphincter, cause it to open up, and cause reflux. But many, if not all of these, are common contributors to hiatal hernia as well. So it's important that we recognize and address those things first. So in my protocol, Reversing Hiatal Hernia Naturally, there are basically three steps. They're broken down into further steps, but there's three basic steps. And the first is to identify and be aware of and identify and address what are the kind of the culprits that may be contributing to your hiatal hernia, that maybe caused your hiatal hernia. So we're going to talk about that first. But before we do, there was two questions in the group that I wanted to answer. One was about, I talked about yogurt a couple of days ago, and how it's a fairly safe way, or at least it's something that you can try to reintroduce healthy probiotics into your diet. And so you were asking about different brands, and it just so happens that I have several here. Whenever I go to the store, I usually go and check to see if there's any yogurt on sale, because they are expensive. And like I said, the best thing you can do is make it yourself. If you're trying to save money, it's easy and it's much cheaper. You get non-dairy plant milk. There's lots of recipes on YouTube, different ways you can make it with different types of non-dairy plant milk. So, but you were asking for brands. This is one by Kite Hill, and it's an almond milk yogurt, and I got it half price. So I like to go back and see what's on sale. Just grab those. This one's by Chobani, and it's made with coconut milk. This one is by Oui, and it's made with coconut milk. And this one is Silk, and it's made with soy milk. So you just have to check it out. You have to go into your yogurt section. Usually all the non-dairy yogurts will be in one kind of section there all together, or maybe like in a health food department of your store if you have something like that. And then the other question was about, I forget, but I'll remember here in a second. Oh, it was about, oh, I forgot. Well, I'll remember and I'll get back to it. So let me think. Yeah, I've forgotten. Okay, so, all right, so let's get into these different forms of intragastric pressure. So the three ways that I teach in my protocol on how to reverse a hiatal hernia naturally are: one, to identify and address what has caused your hiatal hernia, what is supporting your hiatal hernia, what is exacerbating your hiatal hernia. So the first thing we need to really make sure that we're on the same page about is exactly what's happening with a hiatal hernia, and it's basically the stomach. Now, when I stream live, I'm not sure about YouTube. I know on Facebook everything is reversed, so just keep that in mind. This is my left side, so if it looks like my right, it's because it's reversed. But I think on YouTube, I can't remember, but this is my left side, and my stomach is here on the left, just below, so my rib cage is about here, so your sternum, your rib cage, and then your stomach is just below that. And so when you have a hiatal hernia, really it's all in the name. It's your stomach herniating through your hiatus. Your stomach is here, your diaphragm is here, and there's a hole in the diaphragm, a little hole like that in your diaphragm. Your diaphragm kind of sits like a dome, and your esophagus comes through that hiatus. And so unfortunately for some people, the stomach protrudes through that hiatus. The stomach is supposed to sit kind of down here below the diaphragm if this was the stomach, but with a hernia it's coming through like that, through that hiatus. And so it might look like this, it might look like this, it might even look like this. So those would be some of the different severities of hiatal hernia, or even a prehiatal hernia, which isn't even a real thing. It's just a term that I've coined for when your stomach isn't necessarily herniating through. And this is just my theory based on so many people that they go in, they have a diagnostic, and they're told, we didn't find a hiatal hernia. You have, these symptoms, but we didn't find a hiatal hernia. And that can be because they can be hard to detect, but also because you might have a prehiatal hernia, which is where your stomach isn't necessarily coming through the diaphragm, but it's pressing against the diaphragm, which can also put pressure on that lower esophageal valve and cause it to open up. Okay, so that's what a hiatal hernia is. Now, When it comes to intragastric pressure, that's just a fancy term for different forms of pressure, sometimes intragastric, sometimes exterior. We're going to go through those, that put pressure on your stomach and cause it to push against your diaphragm, or in the case of a hernia, through your diaphragm. Okay, so these are here in chapter 2. I list them under intragastric pressure, and they include, we already went through bloating and constipation. When you're bloated, the stomach gets, expands and it can push against the diaphragm. When you're constipated and you have to bear down to pass the bowel movement, the stomach muscles will contract. It puts pressure on that stomach and pushes it against the diaphragm. So it's really important that if you have some of these things that you address them, because if you're trying to reverse your hiatal hernia, but you can't get these things under control, it's going to be a real uphill battle. So if you're overweight, we talked a little bit about that. If you have a lot of additional interior fat, so it's not necessarily the exterior or the fat, here on your abdomen, but your omentum, which is a sheath of fat internally, or just additional fat spilling over, on the organs inside your abdominal cavity, can cause just overcrowding, which can be additional pressure as well, pushing that stomach up against the diaphragm. If you're a little bit overweight, that's not going to be an issue. If you're a lot overweight, that is going to be an issue. Tight clothing around the abdomen. I'm wearing tight clothing today for this demonstration purposes, because I am going to be showing you these exercises. But in general, like the real tight clothing that particularly women wear, like the tummy slenderizers and the body slenderizers, the Spanx, the pantyhose, all of that kind of stuff. If you're wearing that stuff every day, all day, it's just putting ongoing pressure on the organs of your abdominal cavity, pushing that stomach against your diaphragm. So you really, if you're trying to reverse your hiatal hernia naturally, you want to abstain from wearing tight clothing. You want to abstain from wearing tight clothing. You want to wear loose clothing as much as you possibly can. And then frequent heavy lifting. So whenever we heavy lift, whether we're in the gym or we're picking up our children or we're at work, whatever it is, that heavy lifting causes the abdominal muscles to pull in, to contract, and put a lot of pressure on your stomach, pushing it up into your diaphragm. Ongoing slouching. So if you're at a computer all day or driving all day, or you're just a sloucher, you're not elevated. So if you notice, if I'm down like this, my diaphragm is down and my stomach is up. If I'm up like this, then my diaphragm is lifted away from my stomach. So if you're commonly in a position where your stomach and your diaphragm are pushed together, then let's say you slouch your whole life. That in itself can cause your diaphragm and even if it doesn't cause a hernia, it can cause the diaphragm and the stomach to always be pressed against each other. And when organs are always pressed against each other, they'll begin to adhere to each other. Okay, so and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But so that posture, if you notice when I stand up tall, if you watch my rib cage, it goes up, right? And my rib cage is attached to my diaphragm. So whenever we elevate our posture, we move our diaphragm away from our stomach. Important, because if you have a hiatal hernia, that's going to move your diaphragm away from your stomach. Now, if you have a really large hiatal hernia, which means a large portion of your stomach is in your diaphragm, that may not help. In fact, it may be very painful. So, and that's something I really wanted to start off this video with that I forgot to mention, was what I teach isn't like a one fix for all hernias. It's a really good program and it's helped a lot of people, but it's not a one fix for all people. If it was, I would be the queen of the world, because so many people are afflicted with hiatal hernias. It's a really good program, but depending on how deep that hernia is, like I said, if the majority of your stomach is up in your rib cage, you may need surgery. You may not be able to remove it down. And in the process of just moving it down might cause additional symptoms for you. You may have a very old hiatal hernia. It might not be that big, but it might be very old, which means you have a lot of adhesions. So when I talk about adhesions, I'm talking about what's known as the peritoneum. It's the mesentery within the abdominal cavity that really just kind of holds all of your organs where they are. Like if you ever wondered why when we do a somersault, why all of our organs don't get all jumbled up in a mess, it's because of that mesentery or that peritoneum that kind of holds everything in place. There are adhesions, attachments to hold everything in place. And while there's quite a bit of movement for things to be able to slide around, it keeps things where they're supposed to be. And so when it comes to your stomach, if you have ongoing pressures that are pushing it up against your diaphragm for long periods of time, let's say your entire childhood or your entire young adult years or whatever, that can eventually push it right through the diaphragm. And how that usually happens is when that hiatus gets enlarged. And the diaphragm is a muscle, and as it becomes weaker, that hole can just become a little bit more dilated and a little bit more enlarged. And so you combine those two. You combine pressure always pushing your stomach up, a muscle that's getting weak and flabby, and it can eventually herniate through. Okay, so so let's continue with this list of intragastric pressure. And I should finish about the peritoneum. That mesentery, for lack of a better description, it's like a film. It's like a film, and it can stretch, and it can tear. And that might sound like a bad thing, but when it comes to your stomach being up in a place where it's not supposed to be, we want to be able to pull that stomach down and stretch those adhesions and even tear those adhesions, and then recreate new adhesions where the stomach belongs, which is down here below the diaphragm, right? So we don't want it up here in the chest cavity, we want it down below the diaphragm. So we have to stretch those adhesions, and we have to tear those adhesions, and so this can be the tricky thing that a lot of people have a hard time really connecting with. They think they can just reverse their hiatal hernia and they're good to go, when in fact there are very few people that have that experience. Usually the experience is they might successfully relocate their stomach or get it unherniated. They get it unherniated, they get relief from their symptoms, but then, they eat a whole pizza and the symptoms come back or whatever. They just keeps coming back. And so they can figure out a way to get relief by moving the stomach down, but it keeps going back up. And so this is where the consistency and the patience and the gentleness comes in, of learning how to master moving the stomach down, but also in how to strengthen that diaphragm so that hole can tighten up as much as possible. And what I was alluding to before is this protocol isn't necessarily going to fix everybody, and that's for a variety of reasons. If your hiatus is really large, there's only going to be, I don't know to what degree you can tighten that muscle and shrink that hole. If it's really, really big, I just don't know. You may be able to do it, but it's going to take a lot longer than someone over here who already is, has a pretty tight hiatus. So it's really going to be different for everybody. Okay, so let's get back to this list. So we talked about ongoing slouching and really, elevating your, by standing up tall, you elevate your rib cage, which pulls your diaphragm up and stretches those adhesions. Then tightening and pulling in your abs. So this is something I talk a lot about in my course. Whenever we tighten these abdominal muscles, your ab muscles, your six pack, your four pack, whatever you want to call it. I don't have a six pack or a four pack. They're in there somewhere. But whenever we contract and tighten those muscles by pulling in our gut, by tightening those muscles, it puts pressure on your stomach and pushes it up against your diaphragm. So if you've kind of gotten into the habit of like pulling your gut in all the time, or maybe you exercise a lot and you've gotten into the habit of really sucking in your gut, or maybe it's just for vanity purposes or whatever, that can put a tremendous amount of pressure on your stomach and just keep it supported in that upward position. So we must learn and retrain ourselves to relax all of these muscles, just let them go, wear loose clothing, relax those muscles, and this can take time and practice to overcome that training of always tightening and pulling in those abdominal muscles. I probably get more questions on this one topic than anything, because people, they can't figure out if their muscles are even tight, and they can't figure out if they're even relaxing them. And so it takes time. It takes time and practice to really master the ability for some people to relax those muscles, to expand the belly, which is one of the exercises we're going to go over, really expanding the abdominal, this abdominal wall. Why is it so important to expand the abdominal wall? Well, if you're pulling your stomach in and pushing the stomach up, then every time you breathe, the stomach is supposed to open up to allow the room for that stomach to come down. And so if you're not doing that, then it doesn't have the room to come down. So every time we breathe in, our lungs expand with air, and our diaphragm moves down to accommodate the expansion in the chest cavity, right? But the same thing is happening below the rib cage, where as that diaphragm pushes down, the abs are supposed to expand to accommodate that high pressure that's going on. So we have these high and low pressures within the thoracic and the abdominal cavity with every breath we take. And so as that diaphragm pushes down, the belly is supposed to expand so that there's not all of that overcrowding in the stomach. But we have trained ourselves to always be pulling in our gut, contracting our gut. And by the way, the muscles, they will contract for a variety of reasons, even if you don't realize you're doing it. To stress, if you're irritated, if you're angry, if you're mad, if you're scared, any of those things, the muscles in our body will squeeze as a response to stress. So if you have a lot of stress, you may be contracting your abs and not even know it. Abs will contract in response to being cold. The abs will naturally squeeze and contract in a natural response to a variety of things. So you have to start kind of asking yourself this question, especially when you're symptomatic, like, what are my abs doing right now? Are they pulled in and tight? And if you're not sure, like, you could ask yourself right now, are my abs pulled in and tight? And if you're not sure, ask yourself, can I let my abs go? Like, can I let them go? Can I relax them? And if you feel a relaxation, if you feel the answer is yes, and you can have a relaxation release of your abs, then you were pulling in your muscles. If you can relax your abs, that means you were tightening your abs. So this is something you can start paying attention to, especially when you're symptomatic. What are my abs doing right now? Are they tight and pulled in? Let that go. Improve your posture, lift your diaphragm up, and you may get some relief just from those two things. You may not. Again, everybody is different. If you have a very small hiatal hernia with weak adhesions and attachments, just by doing some simple changes like that, you may get relief. Some of the exercises I'm going to show you in a minute, you may get relief from those as well. I will get to your questions at the end of the live. So you guys can type those in and I'll go back. So there's certain things you may get relief from. Again, these exercises may cause you to have increased symptoms. If your hernia is really lodged in there deeply up into the chest cavity and we start to like move it down, that could be a very painful thing. I hear this from clientele both ways. Some say they do the exercises, it feels great, they get relief, there's no problem, there's no pain. Others say they barely touch themselves at the herniated site and it kills them. So it's going to be different for everybody. So that's why I really, really encourage you be gentle with yourself, really be exploratory, be consistent with the daily practice of these exercises, and just really be gentle with yourself and not in a hurry to just like unlodge that hernia and be on with it, because that's usually not the way it works. Although every now and then I do get feedback from someone that was like, yeah, I just tried your exercise number 8 and I was good to go. That's very rare though. Okay, so let's move on. That was tightening or pulling in your abs often, and then frequent sneezing and coughing, frequent vomiting. So these are all just, natural bodily functions that engage the abdominal muscles. So when we sneeze, achoo, the abs contract and it violently pushes the stomach up. Same thing with coughing, same thing with vomiting. And then the last one I have on here, and this list is not exhaustive, but these are kind of some of the main things that you need to be kind of paying attention to in terms of things that support or exacerbate or can even cause a hiatal hernia. The last one is sleeping in the fetal position, and we've already talked about this, but when you're curled up in the fetal position, it's just pushing that stomach and that diaphragm together. And so that can put ongoing pressure on your LES, on your vagus nerve throughout the night, and that can cause a variety of different symptoms while you're sleeping, innocently enough. So we need to kind of be aware of these things. And as far as that one goes, it doesn't mean you have to sleep on your back or your stomach or whatever. It just means that, throughout the night, if you can transition to your back or your stomach or to your side only straight, instead of curled up, and then fall asleep that way. If you wake up and you're back in the fetal position, that's fine, but at least you were in the fetal position all night long, that ongoing repetitive pressure against some of these different things like the vagus nerve and the lower esophageal sphincter. So that's it for the intragastric pressures. Let's go ahead and move on to number 2 in my protocol, which is moving the stomach down. So moving the stomach down, we do this through a variety of things, but what I teach is through manual manipulation. That sounds funny, but that's right, manual manipulation. So we do it with our hands, and if you're just coming on, this is my left side. It might be reversed. I don't know if YouTube reverses like Facebook does, but this is my left side, and my stomach is here just below my diaphragm and my rib cage on the left side. So that's where your stomach should be. Your hernia is usually right about here. So here's center, usually anywhere from 2 to 4 inches over to the left. just under your rib cage. That's where your hiatus should be, anywhere kind of in this section. So so let's go over a couple of the exercises. The first one that I teach is just kind of a warm up to kind of help these muscles to relax, because when you do these exercises, relaxing the abdominal muscles is key. It's really one of the most important things that you, in terms of your technique of the exercises, is relaxing these abdominal muscles. You just got to let them go and relax them, because when you do that, that just allows gravity to let the stomach kind of hang down a little bit further instead of supporting it and pushing it upward. So you got to release those muscles and wear loose clothing. But you want to start with just an exercise to get these muscles to really just kind of melt and relax a little bit more, because when it comes to muscles, you've all heard of muscle memory. If you are one of these people that's constantly sucking in their gut, then your muscles have forgotten how to stretch and they've forgotten how to relax, and they're tight. Okay, so they might need a little bit of support to relax. And so it's good just to get into the habit of, you can kind of scratch your belly like this. And I'm just using my fingernails and literally just scratching. And just that touch will help those muscles, kind of massage them. You can't really get into your abs and massage those muscles without kind of putting pressure on your organs. So we're just going to come in and, give a little bit of touch. You can do this. You can go around, and you always want to go around and down your left side, right? Because you want to go in the motion of digestion. So you can do that. You can do circular motions. And so you can lie down in bed when you're doing this. You can sit in a recliner. You can do it standing like I am. You don't want to do it in a slouching position because you want your diaphragm moved away from your stomach as much as possible. So reclining, laying down flat is fine, but you always want to go down the left side. So again, I'm just touching those muscles to help them relax a little bit. So that's number one. And you can come in and up here where the herniated site, this is called the solar plexus in here. And as you do a circular motion here, that can kind of radiate out and help to relax as well. And we're not going to go over all the exercises that I teach in my course, because it would take too long. Plus, I would like for some of you to actually buy my course. That's kind of the point. I want to help people, but I also want to, I do sell my course at my website, pamfox.org, and that is how I make my living. And it's $67. I try to price it very affordably. So I would encourage you to purchase the whole course. There's a lot of teaching in there. All of the exercise tutorials are in there. But we will go through most of those right here today if you cannot afford it. But that's number one. It's really setting up a foundation of relaxed abdominal muscles. You can put a heating pad on your belly if that feels good or if that helps, just to really get those muscles to open up and relax. So the next thing we want to do is start moving that stomach downward. And there's a couple of exercises that I teach, and we'll go over those. One is with the heels of your palms. And so you want to come over here from the left and start kind of just underneath your left nipple, and you want to press. And by the way, the reason I have a variety of exercises that I teach is they kind of all move the stomach in different ways, right? Instead of just move it down, move it down, move it down. Some move it down, some move it over, some move it this way. And so we're really stretching all of those adhesions to get that stomach down and detached from your diaphragm. So this first one, you use the heel of your stomach and you move from the midline over towards the belly button. Okay, so you do like this, and then you start from center and you move across. So it's just kind of like that. And guys, it doesn't have to be, really the idea is just to get things moving in different directions. So don't watch this if you're kind of dyslexic. Don't be like, oh, which way is she going? Where is she starting? Where is she ending? We're just moving down in different directions. And right now I'm using the heels because I feel like it's a really good way to kind of get leverage and move. And you don't have to be pushing in super deep. You just want to be getting that movement, keeping those abs relaxed, breathing, relaxing. Try not to make too much of this. It's not brain science. It's not rocket science. You just want to get things moving downward. Okay. So that's one you could start out maybe doing it 10 times, maybe set a timer and do it 30 seconds to a minute. And again, if this causes additional pain, additional symptoms, it's probably because you have a bigger hernia and it's really holding on tight. So maybe you only do it for 10 seconds. Maybe you do it really, really lightly, and we're just going to really slowly and systematically start to stretch those adhesions a little bit more every day. Okay? So that's number one with the heels. And the second one I teach is just about the same thing, but you do it with your fists. Okay. And it's coming up at the herniated site and just pushing straight down with your fists. And with the fists, I feel like you can really get a lot of leverage pushing this way. And I like to do it right from the hernia straight down. Some people like to come in and do it right from the center because, again, when it comes to your stomach, it comes around, there's this greater curvature over here, and then the esophagus comes up through the hiatus like this. And, you know, really getting that movement is going to be different for everybody. Maybe you need to catch this side of the stomach in order to stretch those adhesions. Maybe you need to catch this side of the stomach in order to stretch those adhesions. Maybe you need to catch both sides of it in order to stretch those adhesions. Maybe when you press straight down from here, it's really painful because you have a really tender hernia. So you kind of just have to play with these. And I know that with my clientele, the feedback that I get, so-and-so might be like, oh, I love exercise number 6. That's the only one I do. It really works for me. I get relief. I get movement. I feel great. I love that exercise. Someone else might say exercise number 3. And so, and that's kind of why I developed a protocol with a variety of exercises, because I know when I was reversing my own hiatal hernia, there were certain exercises that I developed and tried, and there were certain ones that really worked for me. That, like, the next one I'm going to show you is actually called rib roll, and it's the one that was my very favorite. It was the one that you would see me doing literally throughout the day, every day, as I was reversing hiatal hernia, while I was at work, while I was at a party, it didn't matter. I was driving in my car. I was always doing this exercise. I call it rib roll because what you do is you find your rib cage and you put your fingers just underneath your left rib. You can do, I'm just using 2 fingers here, but you can use both hands if you want. And you just roll over that rib so that your fingers are now underneath the rib. And the goal of this is really get those fingers between your rib cage and your stomach and create that little bit of space there. And then you hold there, and then you can do just this. You can do just this. There's really kind of 3 levels to this exercise. You can hold it and you can breathe and see how you feel. Especially do it when you're symptomatic. Do it when you're having reflux or when you're having a flare-up of belching or nausea or indigestion or whatever it is. See if you get a little bit of relief just from doing this one exercise. So this would be kind of the beginning way to do it. And you can kind of poke around in there, like not poke around, but just kind of palpate and really just relax. And if you find some little bubbles and gurgles, that means that's a really good spot. That's a good spot to kind of camp around or stick around, hang around in that spot. If you hear or feel kind of a gurgling sensation, because that means you're getting a little bit of movement of those trapped bubbles by moving that stomach. Okay, so this would be number 1, and then number 2 would be to roll. So it would be to lean forward and to lean back, and forward and back. And you would breathe in and out as you're doing this. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And so again, really you can't mess this up. The idea is to find a comfortable position, look for the bubbles, use good posture, relax the abs, and breathe and relax. The reason I'm rolling back and forth is because if you notice, if you watch my chest, when I go from here to this position, my diaphragm is going to move away from my fingers, right? Which means it's moving away from my stomach. And the fingers in that position are going to be kind of holding the stomach down. So when that diaphragm moves away from it, it's going to pull and cause that stretching of those adhesions. Okay, so that's where this kind of rocking comes in. Okay. And then the other thing that you can do is lean to the side. So as I'm holding this position and I lean to the side, that just lifts that. So this is my left, that just lifts that diaphragm on my left side up and away from my stomach. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is the breath work that I teach. So the reason the breath work is so important, and this is the 3rd component of my protocol, is the diaphragm. So your diaphragm, again, is a skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle just means that we have a couple of different types of muscles in our body. We have smooth muscle, which that's the muscle that just does what it does without you having to tell it, right? Like a bicep is a skeletal muscle. If I want to flex it, I can go like that and I can flex it. The muscles of your esophagus, though, those are smooth muscles. They contract and move the food down. You don't have to tell it to do that. The diaphragm is for a long time, it was considered a skeletal muscle because when we breathe, we don't really have to tell ourselves to breathe. But we can tell ourselves to take a deep breath. We can tell ourselves to hold that breath. We can tell ourselves to take a big exhale and linger. So we can control this muscle, and it is classified as a skeletal muscle as of today. And it does have a little hole in it known as hiatus. Again, the esophagus comes through that hole. And we can strengthen our diaphragm with breath work. The thing you have to really understand, though, is a lot of the techniques that people teach to strengthen the diaphragm, like singers, for example, they'll use a lot of these different breathing techniques, or when people meditate or do different breath work for a variety of different reasons. One of the common things you'll see with almost all of that breath work is you'll see a pulling in of the abdominal muscles, right? And we just talked about that. If you have a hiatal hernia, it's really important that you don't do that, right? So the breath work that I teach is kind of hiatal hernia specific. So let's go over that. We'll just go over one of those exercises that I call baby's breath, and it's my favorite, and it's one that you can practice many times. And one of the questions a lot of people ask is, how many times should I do these exercises? And really, what I always say is try to be consistent. Try to do them every day. I never tell people, do them for 20 minutes or do them for 10 minutes or do them for 5 minutes. I have several tutorials in different lengths in my course because for one person, they might need to come in and just do 5 minutes a day. Or maybe they're going to do 5 minutes 2 times a day. Or maybe they're just going to do 10 minutes every other day. It really is just going to depend. I think there's a 20-minute tutorial on there, 22 minutes. For the person that's maybe younger and healthier and has a smaller hiatal hernia, there's no pain that's associated with doing my exercises. So the key is consistency. You want to be stretching those adhesions daily. You want to be able to master the ability to unherniate and move that stomach down. And you want to be strengthening the diaphragm. Now listen, a lot of people want to know, can I strengthen my diaphragm while I'm moving my stomach down, or do I need to move my stomach down first? Because what a lot of people think, and it makes sense, and I understand the concern, a lot of people think that as they start to strengthen and tighten their hiatus, if their stomach is still lodged up in there, it's going to herniate, it's going to strangulate it. And so what I say to that is if you start to notice increased tenderness from doing the breath work, then yeah, go ahead and stop the breath work until you've mastered the ability to unherniate your stomach. This is going to be one of those things, again, that's different for everybody. If you're younger, if you're in good shape, if you have a smaller hiatal hernia, you can do all of the exercises together. You can practice the movement, the manipulation, and then practice the diaphragm work. You can do it all together, and it shouldn't be an issue. And again, if you start to have really extreme pain at the herniated site, then stop the breath work and know maybe you shouldn't be doing that yet because it maybe is tightening up around that hernia. But when it comes to strengthening and tightening the hiatus, you're not going to tighten up that hiatus over the course of a couple of days or even a week. It's going to take a little bit of time, right? Because it's not like we're going in and lifting heavy weights to really bulk up that muscle. We're just doing some breath work, right? We're just working that diaphragm a little bit every day in a way that's going to condition it and start to slowly tighten it. But it's not necessarily going to happen fast. So you don't have to worry about strangulating your hernia after a couple of days of practicing this breath work. Okay, so with that said, the exercise that I call baby's breath is just that. When you watch a baby breathe, if you watch my hands, I'm going to breathe in and you'll see my belly expand, and then as I exhale, it deflates. And when you watch an infant or a toddler sleeping and breathing, you'll see their belly really expand. You don't see much movement up here, you see it down here. I'll turn to my side so you can see when I breathe in, watch my hand. My belly is expanding and my chest is remaining relatively still. So when you start to, I'll demonstrate the exercise a little bit more, but just keep in mind, when you start to practice this, if you notice that your chest is still moving quite a bit and you're not getting a lot of movement with your stomach, that's pretty common. I mean, that can happen, and it's really from a lifetime of chest breathing, a lifetime of forgetting how to breathe into your belly, which is how we're supposed to breathe. So you really have to retrain yourself. So this is something you can practice throughout the day. You can set a timer if you want and just take 3 to 5 minutes to practice this. I used to literally practice it on my lunch break at work, and I would lay down flat on my back and I would put my hands on my belly and I would kind of feel around and maybe do a little bit of manipulation, moving my stomach down. And then I would just practice this baby's breath where I was expanding my belly. So this is all you do. You put your hands on your belly and you just breathe in and you just try to keep your shoulders and your jaw and your chest, everything relaxed, and you just focus on the abs. Really relax those muscles and just expand your belly and exhale. And I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm really connecting with the sound and the feel and the vibration of my breath. And when you do that, it's just going to help you relax and connect with the breath a little bit more and really expand the belly. So I'll do it one more time. And the better people get at this, the more they start to notice relief from things like indigestion, nausea, because that expansion, when that belly expands and that diaphragm moves down with every breath, the diaphragm's pushing the stomach down and then it's moving away from the stomach, and it's pushing the stomach down and then it's moving away from the stomach. And because the belly is expanding, there's room for that stomach to push down. As long as the abs are tight, that stomach only has so far to go. As the diaphragm pushes it down, there's pressure being pushed against it. And all that does is push your diaphragm and your stomach closer together and support your hernia. Okay? All right, let's do questions. All right, Susan says, in the beginning, how long did it take you to start to see results? That's a good question. I'll tell you what I think. It's been a couple years, but it took me a long time. But that's because I was developing the protocol. I went through a lot of trial and error, where I was trying a lot of different things. The real breakthrough for me was when I made the connection with the tightness of my abs and my symptoms. When I made the connection, because I'd be brushing my teeth in the morning getting ready for work, and I would be so symptomatic. I thought my toothpaste was triggering my morning symptoms. So I started brushing with just water, and it didn't matter. I was still really symptomatic in the morning when I was brushing my teeth, and I thought that was so strange. And then I started to notice that my abs were tight when I was brushing my teeth. Why that was, I don't know. I don't know why I was getting stressed out while I was brushing my teeth, but they were. And so I started to experiment with different relaxation techniques, and that's when I started to really make improvements and start to create some of these exercises to get the stomach to move down. I would say that once I started practicing the protocol in its entirety, which was comprehensive, right? It was a variety of exercises, including breath work, daily, so consistency. And I was developing my course, which meant I was shooting tutorials, sometimes 2 or 3 takes before I got the one I wanted. So I was really being consistent with doing these exercises every day for a matter of several weeks to a month. And that's when I really started to notice, like, I have no more symptoms anymore. So once I got, the comprehensive kind of pack of exercises put together and started doing them every day, I started to know changes pretty quickly. Probably within, I would say, 3 to 4 weeks, I started to notice, like, I was less and less symptomatic, to the point where it was like, I couldn't even remember the last time I had nausea or whatever. The belching was a big deal for me. And really, when I started to make the connection with my abs and was able to move that stomach down, I could get relief from the belching whenever I wanted to. Now, keeping my stomach down was another issue. I could get relief from my symptoms, but I wanted to just not have to be holding my stomach down all the time. That's when I realized I had to strengthen that hiatus and keep that stomach down. So yeah. Susan also asked, is blowing up a balloon good practice to strengthen? Yeah, it is. I don't teach it in my course, but I firmly believe in it. And I have worked with people where we've used that as one of the exercises. The issue I have with the balloons is it's more of a advanced exercise. In other words, if you were to go into the gym and say, okay, I really want to build up my bicep, you would probably start out, if you were really sedentary and really flabby and haven't worked out for a long time, you'd probably start out with a light weight, right? And then gradually go up to a heavier weight. You wouldn't go in and just start with the heaviest weights. You'd risk injuring those muscles. And when it comes to,
this is a reminder, take out trash.
When it comes to, it does it twice, hang on just a second.
This is a reminder, take out
Thank you, Alexa. Okay, so when it comes to your diaphragm, your skeletal muscle known as the diaphragm, you don't want to injure it, right? And so when it comes to blowing up balloons, I consider that more of an advance. So if you really want to try the balloons, I would suggest that you use good posture. You warm up your abs first. Try to get those to relax a little bit. Really relax. Wear loose fitting clothing. And just start out maybe with, get a balloon and maybe start out, blow up your balloon once, twice, maybe 3 times, right? And then maybe try it again in 2 days and try it again 2 days later. Start out very easy, okay? It's more of an advanced exercise. It's going to put a lot of stress on your diaphragm. But yeah, it's great for strengthening the diaphragm. Rachel asks, do you have any tips for how to help the lumpy feeling in the throat and discomfort in the chest? Yeah, we went over that a couple of days ago, Rachel. The lump sensation feeling in the throat is usually a symptom of LPR, which is laryngopharyngeal reflux, where the symptoms or the reflux is going beyond the lower esophagus and up into the upper esophagus. So we talked about some different things you can try. One of my favorite things to recommend is a denaturing protocol where you are sipping alkaline water between breakfast and lunch, and again between lunch and dinner every single day. You're not gulping copious amounts of alkaline water. The idea is to saturate the tissues of the throat with alkaline water to get that inflammation down and to diminish any pepsin that may be adhering to the tissues of your esophagus. My hiatal hernia hurts most while at work. Stress. Yeah. Yep, the stress will do it. Again, when you're stressed out, those abs will pull in, it'll push that stomach up and support that. So I would recommend if you can take, 2 or 3 breaks throughout the day, lie down flat, get those abs to relax, make sure you're wearing loose clothing, do some belly rubbing, do some downward movement to see if you can't reset and get that stomach to move down. Now, when I talk about resetting and getting the stomach to move down, again, this is going to be different for everybody. Some people can go with, the first time and they can get their stomach to move away from their diaphragm. These are people with either a pre-hiatal hernia or a very small hiatal hernia. Some people have older, stubborn, they've been there, the hernia has been there for a long time, and so those attachments are strong. And so just a few exercises isn't going to unherniate their stomach or move it away from their diaphragm. So it really takes a commitment. You have to be able to say, I'm going to commit to doing these exercises every day, or maybe you're going to start out every other day, or maybe you're even going to do them 2 or 3 times a day, which some people do. They might do 2 minutes 3 times a day. They might do 5 minutes 2 times a day. Figure out whatever works for you and whatever you can tolerate and commit to that. Because really it's in the consistency. Because you're moving that stomach down and you're kind of relocating it. And that takes time to separate from the diaphragm and recreate new adhesions. This takes time. But for some people who are really lucky, they can at least get relief from their symptoms if they can start to move that stomach away from the diaphragm. I have pain on the left side rib area. Yeah, I have a small hiatal hernia, but it's really painful and causing really bad acid reflux. Yeah, typically the hernia is located just right in here on the left-hand side. This is my left-hand side. It might be swapped, but typically it's right here, just under the rib cage, and you can have pain at the herniated site. It can radiate. Some people have it in the center. Some people have it as far over to the right side. They can have pain in their back and up into their shoulders. And that's more of a radiating thing that can occur for a variety of reasons that involve the nerves. But yeah, that's pretty typical to have pain on the left side and tenderness. But if you can move that down, and keep in mind too, Rochelle, that tenderness and that pain, if your stomach is literally herniated in your diaphragm, and with every breath you take, the diaphragm's moving up and down, so that there's friction around that stomach that shouldn't be there. And so it's going to cause irritation. What does irritation lead to? It leads to inflammation. What does inflammation lead to? It leads to the inability of those tissues to be healthy and normally functioning, and it leads to pain and discomfort. So by reversing your hiatal hernia, I mean, the whole goal of reversing a hiatal hernia is to eliminate the symptoms that the hiatal hernia creates, pain being one of them. Cora says, oh, Susan asks, how many times a day do we, I talked about that. Cora asks, I suffer from a small swelling of the stomach ceiling with acidity. Is it the diaphragm? I don't really understand your question, Cora. A small swelling of the stomach ceiling. Well, the top of the stomach is usually, I mean, that's usually, the reflux comes up through the top of the stomach and into the lower esophageal sphincter and into the esophagus. That's the most common, where it's, you know, the top or the bottom part of the esophagus, the top part of the stomach, the lower esophageal sphincter. That's where we see a lot of damage due to reflux. Of course, I mentioned LPR, what's where the reflux is going up above into the upper esophagus as well. But is it the diaphragm? I don't really understand your question, Cora. I want to explain my work. How do I diaphragm? I want to explain my work. How to do a diaphragm massage. We already went over that. A diaphragm massage. So yeah, Cora, that's actually, you bring up a good point. So the diaphragm is here, and I'm just massaging my diaphragm. So again, it's a skeletal muscle, and that's another thing you can do when we talk about helping all of these tissues, the ab muscles to relax. You can do the same with your diaphragm, okay? So you can start out by really getting in underneath that rib cage. I'm just lightly scratching. You really don't have to get in there and do a lot. It's just the heat from the touch and a little bit of massage that will help that relax. That's the first thing you can do. And then, you know, I talked about leaning to the side. So when you lift your hands up, again, everything's connected. So when I do this, lift up this way, the shoulders are going to lift the rib cage is going to lift the diaphragm, which is what we want. We want to lift that diaphragm. So we can do this, and we can stretch the diaphragm that way, and we can even reach up over our heads, and that'll really lift that rib cage, which will pull that diaphragm up. And then, you know, leaning to the side is going to stretch that diaphragm as well. So those are some things that you can try as well. Some people like to hang, like you hang from a bar, hang from, like, what do you call it, the threshold of your door, or like one of those hanging bars. I wouldn't recommend it if you're older and weak and really inflexible. I mean, you could try it, but just something like this is kind of a modified, just, you know, lifting up like this and really getting that diaphragm up. Why is it that antacid medications don't help me at all? Because, well, an antacid is going to neutralize the acid in your stomach. If you're continuing to have reflux, the antacids aren't going to 100% neutralize the acid in your stomach. And as antacids neutralize the acid in your stomach, the body is going to, as you eat, it's just going to pump out more acids. You're always going to have acid in your stomach. And if your LES is in a state of, you know, being compromised due to, you know, intragastric pressure that we talked about, repeated reflux, which can, you know, exacerbate the problem by creating more irritation and inflammation at the lower esophageal sphincter, then what you have is a valve that cannot close. And so anytime you have a little bit of pressure, like pulling in your abs or sleeping in the fetal position or any of these things we discussed, it pushes that stomach up. And if that valve is wide open, then you're going to have reflux. That's why it's so important to master the ability to move the stomach down, to get your acid reflux under control, whether you're doing it through, you know, nutrition or you're doing it through, you know, medications. You've got to get that reflux under control so that lower esophageal sphincter can heal. So yeah, antacids, some people they help, some people they don't. If your valve is just open all the time and you're constantly doing things that are, you know, you're stressed out all the time, you're pulling in your abs or whatever it is. And by the way, I talk about this more in my course, but the intragastric pressure, that's, you know, one of the more common ways and reasons people get hiatal hernias, but you can get a hiatal hernia from an injury, from trauma, right? Like you're in a car accident, or you had a fall, or you do have a sports injury, something like that. That trauma can cause you to have a hiatal hernia as well. And then these things I talk about can just support or exacerbate it, these different forms of intergastric pressure. Laxmi asks, can I fix it without surgery? Well, yes and no. A lot of people are able to reverse their hiatal hernias without surgery. And it's my opinion that if you can exhaust, when it comes to avoiding medications or avoiding surgery, if you can exhaust your alternatives before you go that route, that's great. There is a time and a place for surgery, however. So for a person who, there's a video on YouTube of a woman who was born with a congenital hiatal hernia, which means they think she's had it her entire life, which does happen, where the walls of that diaphragm in utero don't fully form, and so the hiatus is quite large. And so any amount of pressure, especially in an infant with all of the crowding in their abdominal cavity, can cause that stomach to just herniate right up. And so when they went in to surgically repair her hernia, her entire stomach was in her chest cavity, and it was adhered to her lungs and her heart. I mean, they had to go in and carefully incise and detail her stomach and pull it back down and do this whole repair. And had horrible issues and symptoms her entire life before she got diagnosed. And she was almost my age when they figured out what was wrong with her. So there is a time and a place for surgery. The bad news about surgery is, and you guys don't take my word for it, you can join any number of the support groups on Facebook for hiatal hernia, like a hiatal hernia support group, and listen to what people say about surgeries, about their own experience with surgery, or about a relative they had with surgery. The reason all of you with hiatal hernias, the reason you got your diagnosis and your doctor didn't say, let's get you in and get you operated on so we can remedy this, the reason they don't do that is because they oftentimes are temporary. So you go to all of that trouble of having a risky surgery, which any surgery is risky, just to have it fail, just to have it be temporary, right? And so things you have to understand is all of these different forms of intragastric pressure that we just talked about, they can support, exacerbate, and even cause a hiatal hernia. And so if you don't address those things and you go in and have the surgery, all of those things you were doing before your surgery are going to likely cause you to have a re-herniation. Okay, and so people, sometimes they have their surgery and they're thrilled. Symptoms go away, they can eat whatever they want, they feel great, but then 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, whatever, back come the symptoms and they've re-herniated. So it's really important to understand that there are ways that you can attempt to reverse your hiatal hernia naturally. And it's just this, it's addressing what's causing the intragastric pressure, it's mastering the ability to move the stomach down, and it's strengthening and conditioning your diaphragm. So you may be able to reverse your hiatal hernia with those natural and comprehensive methods. You may be able to, maybe not reverse it, but you may be able to get relief from your symptoms, and that may be enough for you. But there is a time and a place for surgery. There is a time and a place. And the most important time and place for surgery would be if you have a strangulated hernia. That is where you are in so much pain, with a hernia, that you end up in the ER because you're in so much pain. And they go in and they take a look and they go, oh, you've got a strangulated hernia. We need to operate now. Okay, Merling asks, I always hear gurgling noises when I belly breathe. Is this normal? I wouldn't use the word normal. For some people, they get those gurgling noises when they belly breathe. And that's a good thing, because that means that those bubbles have room to escape now because you're getting that movement. Other people do the exercises and they're like, I can't find any bubbles. I can't get any gurgling. So I wouldn't call it a normal thing, but I'd call it a good thing. Do you still have flare-ups? If so, what do you do? Yeah, I wouldn't say I have flare-ups. Occasionally I'll have, like yesterday, for example, my husband went and got fish and chips. He always does this. He only eats the fish and he doesn't eat the chips. So I ate all these deep-fried French fries. Deep-fried, greasy. I eat French fries all the time that I make myself, that I cook in the oven with no oil, and I do fine with those. In fact, they're probably one of my favorite foods in terms of how good I feel after I eat them, because they're so satiating, and I get almost a euphoric high from eating potatoes. But But these French fries that were cooked in a deep fryer, I ate the whole thing, and probably within 15 minutes, I started to notice a little bit of indigestion. What do I do, and why is that? It's because that fatty food has caused a little bit of slow digestion, which caused a little bit of bloating, which causes my stomach to get pushed up against my diaphragm. Now, do I have the symptoms that I used to have or those types of flare-ups? I do not, thank God. But yesterday is an example of when I will have my stomach get bloated and pushed up against my diaphragm, which puts pressure on my lower esophageal sphincter, and I will feel a little bit of nausea or indigestion. What do? I move my stomach down. I do a few deep breaths. I might do a couple of stretches in order to help that slow digestion to get moving. I might, do some circular motions like this. I might come in and really massage the stomach and the intestines just to really help things move along a little bit. And for me, that's really all I need, moving the stomach away from the diaphragm and getting things moving. Something like a downward dog, a yoga position helps me. So I know what works for me so that I get relief in those instances. But yeah, occasionally I'll have something like that, but it's pretty mild for the most part. Thank the good Lord. What's your favorite exercise to strengthen the diaphragm? My favorite exercise to strengthen the diaphragm is the breath work that I teach. I went over one of those exercises called, baby's breath, and I have, I can't remember if there's 2 more or 3 more. I think there's 3 or 4 total. And then I also have, so the course that I sell, Reversing Hiatal Hernia Naturally, teaches you really all that I've learned and all that I know about reversing hiatal hernia. So there's the education, which is kind of a lot of what we talked about today. And then there's the exercises, all of the different tutorials. And then the second course that I developed is really a maintenance course that's for people who either have a small hiatal hernia diagnosis or they've already reversed their hiatal hernia and they want some simple breath work type exercises they can maybe do, first thing in the morning or before they go to bed on a daily basis to keep the diaphragm strong and healthy. And so in there, we focus mostly on breath work. So the breath work that I teach, it's not anything, it's really just all adapted from other people's breath work that I learned from other people. I just adapted it to be hiatal hernia specific, which means we don't pull in the abs, and we do a lot of like deep exhales, which cause the diaphragm to come up nice and high. So yeah, I teach those in both of my courses. But if you buy both courses, there is a bundle on there where if you buy the 2 together, it's $99. So you save a little bit of money doing it that way. And that maintenance course is only $49 if you buy it by itself. So I have the $67 course and the $49 course. Or you can buy them together for $99. But that maintenance course is only $49. And I would say if you know that you have a small hiatal hernia, you've been diagnosed with a small hiatal hernia, I think that course is great for that. And there's a little bit of teaching on there as well, but it's mostly the exercises. Okay, I think we have one more question. Zara says, did you ever get headaches or migraines in connection with a hiatal hernia? I did. I did get bad headaches and migraines. I don't know that they're connected to my hiatal hernia. I was never really able to make that distinction. When I started getting migraines, I kept a headache journal and I wrote down everything I ate. I wrote down my cycles. I wrote down the humidity. I wrote down my mood. I wrote down my stress. I was trying to find patterns to see what was triggering these headaches because they would come about once every 30 to 40 days and they would last 48 hours and they were horrible. I was just disabling. So I don't know that they were connected to my hiatal hernia. And then when I reversed my hiatal hernia, I continued to have the headaches. I still have them to this day. They've gotten a lot better. They don't last 48 hours anymore. They last sometimes 24 hours. Sometimes they don't even last. Sometimes I take extra strength migraine Excedrin. If I take that as soon as I'm getting that headache, sometimes I take 2 of those and I'm fine the rest of the day. I don't even notice I have a headache. So that's improved quite a bit for me. But yeah, so Rochelle says, what do you do for nausea? We talked about that. I don't really do anything for nausea in terms of like taking anything. For me, getting the stomach to move away from the diaphragm gave me instant relief from nausea. because when that stomach pushes against the diaphragm, it irritates the lower esophageal sphincter. That's the valve that opens up when you need to vomit. That's the valve that opens up when you've been food poisoned. It opens up when you have a virus and the body is trying to expel something that it doesn't want in the body. So that valve will open up if it gets irritated in the right way. And so you can have, I know for me, that was one of my ongoing symptoms before I was able to reverse all of this. I always felt kind of mildly nauseous. And what a relief to be able to overcome that. That was wonderful. Susan says, I purchased the classes. They are worth it. Thank you, Susan, for the kudos. And Merling says, Susan, are your symptoms much better? All right, well, I'll let Susan answer that one. All right, guys, we've been on here for a full hour, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope this has been helpful. If you're new, I am leading a 30-day challenge. It's a plant-based challenge that eliminates all common trigger foods. My book, Plantar Reflex, can be found on Amazon, and my support group is on Facebook called Plantar Reflex Support Group with Pam Fox. You can request to join there, and I try to approve those every 24 hours. Thanks, Rochelle. I appreciate that. Thanks, Merling. All right, that's it. Thanks, everybody.